I'm Alison Lees, Chair of the Oxfordshire Mammal Group, and it's a great pleasure to see you all here tonight. What I think is going to be special for me, a very special talk. But I'll first of all introduce Claire, our speaker, who I first met when she was a master's student at Brooks in the primatology department, and then she went on to do her PhD. And some years ago, we had some student presentations, 3 in an evening, and Claire came and presented the outline or the early work of her PhD. So I'm delighted that she's now back with a fully fledged PhD, well, with a fully fledged doctorate behind her, and Dr. Claire Cardinal. She's also a member of the Oxfordshire Mammal Group Committee, and she's going to talk about this very important topic of sort of human-wildlife interaction in Madagascar, which is a country close to my heart and a very, very poor country. So I think we'll have a fascinating insight and no doubt some beautiful slides. So welcome, Claire.
Thank you, Alison. Oh, so I can't see my slide. So as you can see, I'm going to talk about human-wildlife interactions, which was part of my PhD study that I did over 5 years from 2017. But tonight I'm going to talk from the perspective of how conservation, biodiversity conservation affects humans and wildlife, and how the interactions between them affect conservation itself. I can't actually see my slides on here, so I'll have to keep looking up. So this is the structure of the talk. First of all, I'll give you an introduction to wildlife conservation in Madagascar. Oh, great, thank you. And then we'll look at how conservation affects people and the endemic wildlife. So look at the relationships of subsistence farmers with the forest and with the wildlife that lives among it. And then looking specifically at how hunting affects lemurs, their behavior and their demography. And then how forest degradation affects carnivore distribution. And I mean, we all know that lemurs are endemic to Madagascar, or at least you will at the end of this talk. But there's also a really important group of carnivores that are also endemic to Madagascar, the euplerids. So I'll talk with you about those today. And at the end, drawing together how the interactions between those groups and the conservation programs bring out conflicts, conservation conflicts. So a little bit about Madagascar. It's a subtropical island just off the coast of Africa. It's been isolated from Africa and India for 88 million years. And because of that, the biodiversity, the wildlife, fauna and fauna have evolved very differently to everywhere else. So over 80% of flora and fauna is endemic to Madagascar. And there's huge diversity, largely driven by the geography of the country. I mean, you can see on this map, there's very different ecozones. So most of the weather comes from the Indian Ocean, from the east. So, the wet side of the eastern side. Then there's a band of mountains down the kind of central part, which blocks the rain from the western side. So the western side is much drier. Down in the south, we have spiny forest, and then we have dry forests and mangroves in the northeast. And so these ecozones have really driven biodiversity in Madagascar. It's only been very recently colonized by humans. So in around the year 700 was when human settlement really took off. There had been people visiting because of its location in the Indian Ocean. It's been sort of a big stop-off point for seafarers for up to 10,000 years. But proper human colonization only started very recently. The current population's just over 33 million and rising very quickly. And that's really because the young average age of the population. Over half of the population live in rural areas, and the majority of those are wholly reliant on farming or fishing for their livelihoods. And in Madagascar as a whole, 72% of people suffer food insecurity. The recent United Nations figures say that 68.4% are living with multidimensional poverty. So it's one of the poorest, most deprived countries in the world. And that affects how people's relationships with the forest, with the countryside, and with wildlife. So coming to wildlife conservation in Madagascar, in 2003, there was the World Parks Congress, and the countries, the parties that attended the Congress signed the Durban Accord, and this gave a target that 10% of all of the nation's territories would become protected. And they also introduced the idea of respecting rights of indigenous people, which had been largely overlooked until then. And at that time, because of that focus on the rights of indigenous people, they introduced this sixth bottom category of protected areas, so protected areas with sustainable use of natural resources. And at that conference, the then president of Madagascar, Mark Ravalomanana, stood up, surprised everyone by saying that he was pledging to triple the coverage of protected areas in Madagascar. Now, as of today, there's 12.83% of land and inland waters protected. So there's gone a long way towards designated protected areas. And we'll look at how effective that might be. So Malagasy wildlife law, there's three categories of legal of law for protecting animals. So there's the fully protected category, which covers all lemurs, parrots, the endemic red owl, and the fossa, which is this guy at the top, which we'll hear more about later. Is the top carnivore. And those animals in that category are fully protected. They can't be hunted, they can't be captured or harmed. Then we have game, which include the tenrec, which is this hedgehoggy looking animal, various birds, bats, and they can be hunted within designated seasons. And then we have pest species like bush pigs and rats, which can be hunted at any time. So this is where I did my research, Sitangambarica Nouvelle Protégée. It was one of the protected areas that was set up after the Durban Accord. And I did a comparative study looking at two different sites. So Iabuku on the northeast side, which is the top side, and Emanubu, which is the one at the bottom. And that enabled me to compare conditions across the two different sites. So conservation management in Sitangambarica, it's classified as a category 6 protected area, which is the protected areas with sustainable use of natural resources. And the objective is to protect natural ecosystems and use natural resources sustainably where possible. Effectively, in Sitangambarica, it was set up so we have a core protected zone, which is the pale green on the map, and then the pink is a zone where people can use natural resources. But effective, so local people are no longer allowed to go into the core area. They're no longer allowed to harvest natural materials in there. But if we flip back to the previous slide, effectively the core area is just the mountain tops where the where the forests remain, and the areas that people can use for natural resources are largely denuded. So there's not much that they can actually use. So looking at the two field sites, the Iabuku site in the east is part of a biodiversity offset site linked to a mine in the region, and so extra conservation resources are being put into that to protect it. So it's effectively run as a integrated conservation and development project. Amanobo on the east side is more typical of the remainder of Sitonga and Baraka, in that there's no real conservation money going into it. There's not much external activity. So it's largely left to the community to manage resources. But effectively, we have a Malagasy NGO, a City Madagascar, that are responsible for managing the whole area, ostensibly with the aim of handing it over to local people, local community management, when they have the capacity. But this has been the situation for 12, 13 years, so still no sign of them handing it over. So because I'm looking at the interface between humans and animals, I have to use a variety of different techniques, so crossing anthropological and ecological research methods. So for the human side of the study, the social study, I use semi-structured interviews and participatory observations, which really consist of informal conversations with people living as part of the community, taking part in some of the activities of the community. And then for the lemur aspects of it, I did line transect surveys and behavior surveys. And then for the carnivores, which are very elusive, I used a camera trap survey. And I'm not going to talk much about the methods, but if you have any questions about them, please ask me afterwards. So this is what it looks like on a good day, walking around in the sunshine, going to visit people in their houses and having chats. This is what it looks like on a bad day when it's pouring with rain, and the leeches are jumping out of the forest to catch you. And obviously I couldn't do this on my own. I worked with two magnificent teams of Malagasy people, one at each field site, and with Fidel, who is my research assistant and translator at both of the sites. And, obviously I couldn't have done the work without them. Better speed up. So what did I find out about people? At both field sites, they have diversified livelihoods. So they're subsistence farmers. They grow a variety of crops, very much dependent on rice and cassava, and then fruit trees and other crops. They do some rearing of animals, but they don't really eat them very much. So cows are important for sort of economic purposes and for prestige, but they're only really eaten at sort of life events, births, deaths, and marriages. They're very reliant on the forests for materials for building houses. So you can see all their houses are built from wood with palm roofs. They use forest materials for pestle and mortars, for making baskets, for pretty much everything. Traditionally harvesting of animals in the forest. So you see that there's a difference between the two field sites. This is Emmanubu in the east. It's part of a big river valley. It's very moist. The land is very fertile. You can see there's these rice terraces. So it's quite productive there. And that contrasts with Iabuku in the west, which is a coastal site. It's pretty much sand. So now that people are no longer able to to grow crops in the forest. They're trying to grow crops on sandy soil, and that has an effect on their productivity. So what do they tell me? In Ibuku, which is the biodiversity off-site site, they told me they used to grow their crops in the forest, and they would trap animals while they kind of go into the forest and live alongside their crops and trap animals when they were doing it. But they said they're no longer allowed under the rules to go into the forest or to hunt animals. So they've been forced, the land in the forest was all sort of under communal ownership. There's no land rights, there's nothing on paper, but people's rights were taken away by the designation of the conservation area. And so they were forced to change from a shifting cultivation type of agriculture to sedentary cultivation and rain-fed, from rain-fed rice growing to irrigated rice growing. So during the study period, I saw no lemur traps in the forest, didn't see any reduction of forest cover in that area. But people said that they don't go into the forest, not because they support the biodiversity conservation. They said that they are scared of getting caught, they're scared of repercussions from the managing NGO, City Madagascar. And there were a lot of people who were complaining about hunger as a result and having to rely on fallback foods. So even though there's a development program, the people living closest to the forest said that they're not feeling any benefits from it. All the money's going to the kind of the big villages near the coast that are easy to reach. So by contrast, in Amanubu, there's very little conservation intervention from the NGO. But the community managers who are responsible for it, they're fearful of enforcing the rules, because the people that they're enforcing against are their neighbours, their family members, people go into the forest with axes and machete-like tools. So if the forest rangers try to stop them doing it, they're scared of being attacked. They have no insurance, they have no health rights, no permanent employment. So effectively, the rules are not being enforced, and people are just sort of living their livelihoods as they always have. So people access the forest daily to harvest timber, firewood, and to hunt. And there's extensive conversion of the forest boundaries to agriculture. And you see in this photo here how the slopes on the edge of the forest are being eaten away, converted. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, converted for rice terraces, and then with the associated erosion. And we saw many lemur traps there, and a lot of opportunistic hunting. People do pursuit hunting with catapults or just throwing stones to catch animals. So I wanted to know how people think about and talk about animals, so how they categorize them. Most people talk about different species, or what we would call species, by their individual names. So there's not really much grouping of animals in the way we do in Western taxonomy. So there's some groups like birds, fauna, snakes, bibi larva, which means long animal, or insects, bibi kelly, which is little animal. But other than that, animals are referred to by their individual name. And that's quite typical of communities where people live close to and interact with animals on a daily basis. So in amongst this, lemurs and carnivores are not grouped. They're not seen as the same. They're seen as disparate species, even though people know quite a lot about them. So they're not thinking about them in the same ways as Western conservationists are. And the ancestors are a very important part of Malagasy people's lives. The ancestors are believed to be present, so they're consulted on day-to-day and sort of annual activities, so when to plant the crops. And so there's a big influence about what the ancestors did, what the ancestors ate. And there are a lot of taboos, particularly about food. And that links through to how people think about animals. So people do talk about pets, but I found that what people refer to as pets are reared animals. So they can be eaten, so it's cows, pigs, sheep, some little birds. As I mentioned before, cows are culturally significant. But most wild animals are regarded as food. So what somebody said to me in an interview, oh, we're the Malagasy, we eat everything. But it's not quite as simple as that, because some animals are faddy, taboo. For example, the red owl, people are really scared of that. When I showed them pictures of the owl, they would cringe away from the picture because they're thought to be the spirit of an ancestor, but not your ancestor, somebody else's ancestor that means you harm, and they live in the tombs. So people won't eat them, and they don't want anything to do with them. And then dogs are faddy because they're considered dirty. So then I wanted to think about how people talk about and value lemurs. So these are the two lemurs that I focused on in my study, the southern bamboo lemur and the red-collared brown lemur. When I first went to Madagascar, it was to do an ecological study of these lemurs, which I'll talk about. And I went into the forest at sunrise and sunset every day for 2 weeks, didn't see any lemurs. And after 2 weeks, I'm like, why aren't I seeing any lemurs? And the people in my team said, oh, your jewelry, are you wearing silver? And I said, yeah. And they said, oh, you're not supposed to take silver into the forest. The lemurs don't like it. Okay, so I took my jewelry off, left it in my tent, went to the forest next morning, saw lemurs. In the evening, saw lemurs. And I was like, okay, it's working, I won't question it. So it was kind of, as time went on, I thought, I wonder what the origin of this is. It's working, but who knows? And it turns out that it's linked to folklore, where that it's an origin story where they believe that humans, bamboo lemurs and brown lemurs, come from a common ancestor. And the common ancestor, there was a big battle, and the ancestor Rahalu fled into the forest with all his wealth and hid in the forest. And then his offspring became the bamboo lemur Halu and the brown lemur Variki. And when Rahalu died, he gave all his wealth to his grandchild, the Variki. And we know that because the Varikis got silver on their head and silver on their hands and gold on their collar. And Rahalu said, if you see any humans, make sure you hide all your wealth away. So this is the origin of the reason why we don't wear silver or have money in our pockets when we go into the forest. And in other parts of Madagascar, having an ancestor who is a lemur or an ancestor who's been helped by a lemur would give protection to that lemur. But actually in America, these are the two most hunted lemurs. So we have to think, well, what may happen in a different part of the island can't necessarily translate everywhere. So we can't generalize about folklore. It's very specific. So I wanted to think, well, if they do have some cultural significance, how come they're hunted? How do people value them? So what do people tell me? When I mention the brown lemurs, the varroa, people's eyes light up. They taste good. They want to hunt them. Everybody wants to eat them. They catch them with these specially designed traps or with slingshots, and it's not opportunistic. They go out specifically to hunt them. But there's a difference between the two sites. As I said, there's no traps in Iabuku, but there's still a lot of hunting in Amanobo. So the bamboo lemurs, people told me they don't taste very good. The reason why they want to catch them is because they regard them as a pest species. So even though they're protected under Malagasy law, people don't like them because they come out of the forest and they eat their rice, and they particularly like the little shoots of rice when it's new and fresh. So people chase them. They chase them with stones. They set traps for them, but if they catch them, they don't eat them. They just either throw them away or give them to the kids because they taste terrible. So that's people. So just to sum up, there's spatial variations in the effect of conservation management on people's livelihoods and well-being, on their use of forest resources, on the extent of forest that's cleared for agriculture, and on their hunting practices. And even though their perceptions of animals are shaped by sort of ancestral norms, their contemporary practices are shaped by fear of repercussions or fear of livelihood concerns. So there's little intrinsic support for biodiversity conservation. So moving on to the lemurs, I wanted to know how these different human effects affect their demography and their behavior. So looking at, is there a difference between in abundance and group size of lemurs between the areas that have high and low hunting pressures? And as you would expect, I hypothesized that there would be lower abundance where there's high hunting pressure, and there would be a difference in group size. And looking at their behaviors, I wanted to know, do they consider humans to be a threat? And what I considered was, well, we're a ground-based animal. What are their other main ground-based predators? And their main predator is the fossa. They're about this big. They're amazing. They can climb trees. They're the top predator, but they start from the ground. And similar to humans, they're a stealth and an ambush predator. So I looked at all the different ways in which it's been recorded that lemurs react to ground-based predators like the fossa, and I surmised that the behavioural reactions to humans may be similar to that. And I also wanted to know whether lemurs showed threat-sensitive responses according to their risk of being hunted. So the results of the lemur abundance survey, I walked 102 kilometres of transects, each kilometre long, and detected 37 groups. This is across the two field sites. And as you can see from the figures, if I can get the light to work. Yep. So Eulemur colaris is the brown lemur. There was a significant difference in abundance between the site with no hunting and the one with high hunting, and as well for the bamboo lemur, Hapalemur meridionalis. So as expected, hunting was having a big effect on their populations. And this one shows the group size. For the group size, I used opportunistic encounters as well as the transect surveys. So if I was out doing a vegetation survey and saw some lemurs, I would record their group size and behaviours as well to add to the data. So there was a significant difference in the Eulemur colaris, the brown lemur, group size, with higher group size where there's no hunting, lower where there's a lot of hunting. Also for the bamboo lemur, although that wasn't statistically significant. So when I was looking at the anti-predator behaviors, there were two theoretical concepts that I wanted to look at. So there are a lot of theories about anti-predator behaviors, but I was particularly interested in the threat-sensitive behavior hypothesis. And what that relates to is an animal can't always be acting scared. It can't always be protecting itself from predators, because it wouldn't have time to do all the other things that it needs to survive. So eating, sleeping, mating. So the hypothesis says that they will kind of trade off their anti-predator behaviors against other activities, and they'll modulate their behavior relative to the predatory risk, so to the predatory threat. So they look at the risk of being predated. If it's low risk, then they will carry on doing their normal activities. If they think it's high risk, then they will do predator avoidance or behaviors. And then we have the landscape of fear framework. And the part of what that says is that prey's perception of being predated is spatially and temporally uneven, and that prey animals will respond to that by either avoiding high-risk areas or adjusting their behaviors to avoid predators where there's a high risk. So these are the two concepts I was looking at. So here are the behaviors that I looked at. As I said, they were based on how these two lemurs respond to ground-based predators. And I looked at the effects of site and species on their behaviors, and on their deterrent behaviors, which I'll come to, and also their vertical movement, because you would expect a prey animal, if there's a ground-based predator, what's the best thing to do? Go up, you would think. So these are the behaviors that were predicted by species. So brown lemurs were more likely to flee noisily. They were more likely to be vigilant, to stare at us, to approach us, or to move silently. Whereas the bamboo lemurs, more likely to flee silently or to give alarm vocalizations or grunt vocalizations. And both these species, they use a grunt as a sort of contact call, so and then as the danger persists, that will escalate, so and more, the group will all come together. As they get more agitated, it will turn to an alarm vocalization, which is like a whoo-wee, whoo-wee, and then usually they'll depart. So I wanted to specifically compare the behaviors by site. So at Tiabuku, they were more likely to do an alarm vocalization, but quite surprisingly, they were more likely to approach us and to do vigilance, so to observe us. At Emanobo, both species were more likely to flee either silently or noisily, which was quite a surprise, because I thought they would just go quiet and flee. So looking at their deterrent behaviors. So deterrent behaviors are designed to deter the predator. So they vary between species, but they can include physical mobbing or making loud noises to scare the predator off, or to alert the predator to the fact that it's been seen. Or they can include inspecting the predator, watching it, or sentinel behaviors, which is where one animal will stay as kind of lookout and the others will move away. So I found that at Tiabuku, they were more likely to do deterrent behaviours, and the brown lemurs, lemur, were more likely to do it than the bamboo lemurs. Now, in terms of vertical movement, it was a bit of a surprise. As we would expect, the the bamboo lemurs, the hapalemur, were more likely to move upwards. And there was a difference between the sites. So at Emanobo, where there's bigger hunting pressure, they would go higher. But surprisingly, the brown lemurs, lemur, were more likely to move downwards and move towards us. And there was variation within the group, which suggests that they were doing sentinel behaviour. And indeed, I saw a lot of that. So the one brown lemur would stay behind while the others went away, and the lemur would just be watching us to basically monitor the threat. And that suggests that in Emanobo, they do consider humans to be a threat, but not a threat at the moment. So they're just kind of keeping an eye on us to see if we're going to do anything. But they're not too worried about it. Where at Emanobo, they know we're a threat. There's a lot of hunting there, and they want to get away as quickly as possible. So key points from that: there's spatial differences in the abundance and group size according to the level of hunting pressure. We saw at Emanobo there has actually been an increase in abundance since the conservation program has been in place. So that's looking good for the lemurs. And that they adjust their behaviours spatially according to the threat level, which supports the landscape of fear hypothesis. So very quickly on the carnivores, it was an exploratory camera trap survey of the euplorid carnivores. And what we did was set up cameras at both sites over a 6-month period at Iabuku. It ended up just being a few days at Emanobo because of the pandemic, having to pull out quickly. But then I did occupancy modelling to determine the effect of canopy cover, of altitude, proximity to the forest edge, and proximity to the villages on the way that the carnivores were using the habitat. So it's spatially looking at where they're going. And this is what we've caught on our cameras. So the top row is the endemic euplorid carnivores. On the left, the fossa, which is the top carnivore, then spotted Phaneluca, ringtail Vonsera, and the broad stripe Vonsera, which is actually my favorite because they're all perky when you see them on camera. But we also got some non-native carnivores, and this is not a good thing because they can have a negative effect on the use of space, on the prey that the endemic carnivores are eating, and they can also spread disease. So it's been found in other studies that they have a negative effect both on abundance and on use of habitat. So we saw dogs in the forest. This was only at Emanobo, and they were all domestic dogs. So they were either out with hunters, mainly hunting for tenrec, or they were dogs that were kind of come out of the villages and roaming free within the forest, but they were dogs that belonged to people. Got some photographs of cats. This isn't what a village cat looks like. They're sort of skinny and white or black. So this is a cat that's living in the forest. We haven't done genetics on it yet, but it's an exotic or feral cat, but it's living in the forest. It's not a kind of a village cat. And they're competing with the endemic carnivores. And we also got a couple of photos of the small Indian civet, which is an introduced species that's quite widespread across Madagascar. So We found high occupancy of all 4 of the native carnivores at Iabuku. For the spotted fanluca, fusa, and broad-striped fonsera, we saw higher occupancy in the interior forest than in the edges. Only for the ringtail fonsera, we saw some flexible use of the intact and degraded forest, so at the forest edges. So that suggests that they have a strong preference for intact forest, which means we have to keep the forest intact. And that reflects findings elsewhere in Madagascar for these species. As I said, the presence of non-native carnivores is concerning. And so there's evidence that the habitat degradation and human disturbance is affecting the top carnivore occupancy. So how does this all fit together with conservation? Although I've talked about these in a linear manner, you can see it's an interrelated social and ecological system where they're all affecting each other. And in neither of the sites is the conservation regime working, meeting the aim of humans and animals both thriving. So in Iabuku, where we've got the Integrated Conservation Development Project, the forest and the wildlife are benefiting, but the people's livelihoods are suffering. They're complaining about hunger. In Eminobo, under the community conservation, nothing's really different to the humans. They're living the lives of their ancestors, but there's extensive forest degradation, depleted wildlife, and invasive species. And in both cases, the conservation management is linked to fear. So there's no intrinsic support of the local community for the conservation programme. There's a lot of issues of inequity and social justice about people not being able to access resources that they need. And that's likely to lead to, well, it's already leading to conservation conflicts, people disobeying the rules, people complaining about hunger, but that can only grow if not tackled in the future. So the challenge in all this is finding a solution that meets the needs of people and animals. So just a big thank you to everybody who's taken part in the project in various different ways. And here again is the fabulous Malagasy team, or most of them. And just to say, we've got some craft materials from Madagascar that I brought back with me. Last year, I was working in the northwest of Madagascar in the dry forest, and I was studying these cockerels safaka, which are fabulous. What I'm fundraising for is the local school. In Madagascar, the government will build schools, but usually it's the local people that have to pay for the teachers or make a contribution to the teachers. They have to pay for equipment. And this is what a classroom typically looks like. This one's got some tables and chairs, some have none at all. So my colleague Grisella and I have been running a sort of conservation awareness engagement program, and we want to be able to continue that in the future. So that's what our little fundraiser's for, if you'd like to support that. So thank you very much for listening. I think we've got time for some questions. Alison.
Thank you, sir. That's wonderful. Can you hear me? Can people hear me, or should I put this on? Yeah. Is it working? I know it's a direct issue, but tourism. Is there any wildlife tourism in that area? In some way that people can see that their wildlife is of such value that people will pay? I mean, I know it's a difficult issue because the money doesn't always go to the people who need it most, but it does create some jobs and things. I mean, Is there any tourism out there in your area?
The difficulty with Sidung and Baraka is it's extremely remote. So it's like 3 days drive from the capital on roads that are like this. There's a flight a day, but it's quite expensive. And then to get to these sites, it's several hours on very bad roads, and then you have to walk in. So it's quite an effort to get to them, especially to Amanobo. The NGO City Madagascar have been trying to introduce some tourism to the Iabuku site, but you've got to be quite intrepid to even get there. And people like, backpackers who are intrepid are not the people with lots of money. The other problem is it's quite difficult to see the wildlife there. People want to go to sites that are easy to get to and they're guaranteed to see wildlife. And there are other parts of Madagascar where that's much more easy. So, and the other part of it is any tourism money is not being channeled from the NGO to the local people. So they're very little involved in it. So they're not benefiting at the moment. The other side of that is we all saw what dependency on tourism meant in the pandemic, when people weren't able to travel for 2 years. So places that are wholly dependent or largely dependent on tourism, that was just cut. And Madagascar as a whole suffered a lot from that. It also suffered from researchers not going there, because all over Madagascar there's a lot of money from research going in, and that just stopped. So it can work in some places, but here I think that it's probably not the answer.
The question, from your perspective, are the NGOs in the medium long term for good or not for good?
I have found this NGO particularly difficult to work for, and I don't think that the people are necessarily benefiting from their work. I don't think that that's necessarily can't be generalized across all NGOs. But I think there is a big difficulty in NGOs being motivated to kind of hand over power, money, resources to local communities, and for local communities like this one to actually have the capacity to manage their resources, because their motivations are very different. They want to live day to day. And I went there to save the lemurs. It sounds naive, but that's what I went for. And I've come away feeling a lot of sympathy for people, because they're just trying to live their lives, and they need a lot more help than just conservation on its own can provide.
Do you think that the IUCN's Category 6 of management areas sorry, do you think that IUCN's Category 6 of management protecting the environment and allowing sustainable development within it is that fatally flawed? Is it fixable?
I don't think it's fatally flawed. I think it's the correct thing to aspire to, but enabling it to work is a huge challenge anywhere. And I think conservationists also need to think about, it's not all about us having the ideas. We need to be working together with communities to come up with ideas together. So our role is to support communities, or this is how I see it, not to tell them what to do. So I think that, having equality and justice for all it's a global issue, isn't it? Sorry, I can't say solve the world. Any more questions?
Yeah, I did wonder if you could tell us about how your teams were recruited and how they were awarded.
Yeah, so the team at Iobuku, the field site had been set up by some previous Oxford Brookes students together with the NGO Asiti Madagascar. So the field site was there. My colleagues had trained local people to be able to help us with field studies, and the NGO had recruited people to kind of do the support stuff, cooks, security, other guides. At Emanobo, I recruited the team. It was largely done kind of by word of mouth in the community. So I was introduced to the community managers and they recommended people. That didn't come without difficulties because it ended up being a lot of people from the elite families, and there were jealousies involved in that. But it's very difficult when you turn up to a site and you don't know anybody, you don't know about relationships. So I pay them directly. I pay them a local wage, which doesn't seem very much to us. I mean, I can pay my whole team and their food on what I could live on in Oxford. So yeah, that's how they're paid. The difficulty again is when there aren't researchers there, they're not being paid to do that. So there's no consistency at this site. I mean, that's by no means common to all of Madagascar or all of research sites, but it's a very kind of under-resourced field site. So when there's students there, there's more happening. And we know that, you know, people would tell me, oh, I don't bait my traps when you're here. I don't cut the forest when you're here. But then I go back the next year and it's all cut. So, you know, there's having a consistent presence can go a long way towards supporting conservation. Yeah. Anyone else?
It's very interesting to hear about the ecologies associated with different lemur species. And were those ecologies very, very local or more widespread amongst? I mean, I guess you didn't have a very large sample of different communities, but I just wondered how varied these ecologies were and the extent to which they applied to different species, you know, just of the lemurs.
I can't really speak to that in this community. I have colleagues at Brookes and elsewhere who have been doing work kind of in wider Madagascar, looking at different folklore, folk stories, mythologies, and there has been some published work. One of our students I can see sitting in the audience is going out to northwestern Madagascar to collect stories this year. So it's something that there hasn't been that much work on. In, you know, the story that I told you, I don't know if all the young people even know that, because it was an older person in the community that was telling the story and people were all sitting around listening and learning in the same way as I was, because it's a, you know, it's an oral tradition. So there's been a little bit of work by our research group on II mythology in this area, and throughout Madagascar, but very, very little else. So it's absolutely fascinating area and yeah, ripe for more research.
Well, Claire, thank you very much. A fantastic talk, easily presented, and I think it's given us some insight into the realities of conservation work in poor countries. I mean, it really is a balance of, and you have to put the people first, really, don't you? You have to take them with you. But also how important it is to collect data, because if you don't collect the data, you've nothing to build the next project on and nothing to show people how important it is. So congratulations for all that you're doing. And thank you very much for coming to talk to us.
Thank you.
Thank